Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, welcome to Life Support. It's so great to have you with us. Life Support is an effort to talk about some of the hard things in life. And in doing so, we discover more of Jesus Christ, because there's just something about darkness in life when Jesus just emerges from it, teaches us about his mercy and grace, and that's what we like to talk about on Life Support. We've got a very special guest with us, and his name is Roy Yanke, and he is in the pastor restoration business at PIR Ministries. Roy, thanks a lot for being here. Appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
All right, again now, so give me the meaning, what is PIR? What does this stand for?
Yeah, PIR stands for Pastor in Residence. That's our official name, but we shortened it into the acronym because that gets a little tough to keep telling people. We are a ministry of renewal and restoration for pastors. So we've been around for 25 plus years, and the Pastor in Residence program, which the name of the ministry was founded around, is the core process that we do for pastors who have been exited. And that's a really unique niche in the church, which empowers a local church to come alongside a hurting family, pastoral family.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And you shared some of your story last time about how you were struggling with some things, and you ended up not being in ministry anymore, and now you're helping others who are in that same situation. We talked a lot about isolation last time we had you, and how pastors find themselves keeping things inside, feeling like no one understands, no one to talk to. What damage can it do when a pastor shuts down? When a pastor decides that either it's that kind of nobody cares, or it's I don't feel safe. Whatever the reason, what are the dangers that lie out there?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly the internal damage to their own soul is where it begins. And it could certainly end up in a clear disconnect from God himself. And so that ministry then just becomes another job, another thing you're doing, and that just leads to really bad things, burnout certainly, and certainly depending on the person's self-awareness and their own understanding of the mechanisms that can take them off the rails, it can lead to moral compromise and all the rest. And that's catastrophic for a pastor or ministry leader. And we've seen this over and over again, especially in recent years. When that happens, the impact on congregation, on how culture sees the church and Christianity is huge. So it can't be underestimated that without making this an untenable kind of position, no one would want to do this because of that. It does talk about the seriousness of paying attention to your own soul and to your growth in Christ as a disciple is really important.
Yeah, I always am aware in my own life of being right on the edge, and I'm just so thankful for God's grace and mercy that has so far kept me from falling over the edge, but I know how close I am. And I'm thankful for mentors. How important is mentoring, Roy, in keeping a pastor mentally, physically, and spiritually healthy?
Huge. It's one of the 5 key relationships that those in ministry need to have. And having those who have gone before, have weathered those storms maybe, and understand how to create good strategies to negotiate them. It's really important, especially for those who are young in ministry. But those of us who've been down the road a while too still need those who've gone before, because there's always a new challenge along the way. So It's huge.
Okay, I'm going to contradict myself now, which I'm very good at that. All right, so on one hand, I really enjoy church governance. I think it's important. I'm kind of a governance geek. I like sitting on boards. I like the organizational part of a church. On the other hand, there are many times I wake up in the morning and think, I'm not really a pastor. I'm a CEO of an organization. What happened to pastoring? And I've got some friends, in churches where they preach and they go visit hospitals, and I think I look at them and go like, now those are real pastors. Do other pastors feel this way too, that they're caught up in this organizational thing and there's so much of that they lose kind of what their calling really is?
Oh, that's just a dangerous subject for me, Paul, because that's a real deal for pastors. So many, and I will say this, there's a lot to be said for good organization and systems, but we have tapped into that so heavily in the church, and the business model has dominated for a lot of years that pastors do feel like all they are is a CEO or a manager, more than even a CEO. They're a manager of the organization. And so the pastoral pieces, those true shepherding pieces, get left alongside, they kind of fit in wherever I can because I'm dealing with all of those administrative details. So there are many, many pastors who deal with that and feel that tension.
Yeah, and even when you're good at delegating and you're not doing, all of the detail work, there's all that pressure of, moving the ministry forward, casting vision, trying to always lay out where the church is headed next, because we all know that the moment you take your foot off the gas, the church begins to kind of crush in on itself because you just have to keep moving forward. But that's exhausting. And not really what we're trained for, because they don't talk a lot about that in seminaries. At least I think they're getting better. But that whole thing of, I can't tell you how many people have said to me, man, you got to cast vision, which is fine, except I also want to pastor people. And that's a dilemma, isn't it?
It truly is. And I tend to push back for a number of reasons on the whole idea of having to keep moving forward and casting vision and all of those high energy administrative management kinds of things. We're in a culture where productivity dominates. And that's not how I see life in Jesus nor life in the church. It's much more organic and ordinary. We live in a culture where extraordinary is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. And if you're not being extraordinary, the guy down the street is. And so all your people are going to go there. But the call, I think, that Jesus gives on us, even as pastors and ministry leaders and to the church, is to embrace and live in the usual and the customary, which is what the word ordinary means. And that you can't always be trying to push the pedal to the metal. It's going to exhaust you. It will exhaust your people. And so we've got to step back from that, I think, and examine it. Again, nothing wrong with systems and organizational things and having a vision. But the idea that you got to keep pushing it forward, I'm not so sure what that really means.
Yeah. Well, I like what you're saying, and I know that there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, because the church is not like an organization in the sense that it's a living, breathing organism, and we all have a part in that because we're all part of the body of Christ. But I think boards don't always buy into that philosophy, and it's interesting because sometimes I'll read, all of us in ministry, we read kind of the same guys, the same blogs, the same books, and we're kind of in this group think. And many times I'm reading something and I'm going, yeah, I get that, but I wish somebody would talk to boards, because that's where a lot of that pressure comes from. So how can a board member that's listening right now, how can they minister to the pastor?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's a dynamic, a conversation that needs to continually happen between pastors and board members and congregants in the church to talk about these things, to have the conversations that can lead to a culture of ministry health. We have a workshop that we do for denominations or church groups or whatever, individual churches, where it's called Cultivating a Culture of Ministry Health. And it's meant to be the catalyst for those kinds of conversations where pastors can help board members, and board members can push back if they need to on some of the systems things. But in that conversation, you begin to reach a place of consensus about what ministry health and the culture of the church needs to look like in order for it to fulfill the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, while at the same time not getting trapped in the productivity metrics that we're so dominated by.
Yeah, and that's where COVID, I think, we were talking about COVID before, and that's what I think really throws us, because we're so accustomed, good or bad, to, we've got metrics of how our church is doing, what's healthy, what's not healthy. Now those metrics are gone. Like, I don't even know where 30% of my congregation is right now, to be honest. It's not that I've given up on them. I just don't know what's happening. And so I've had to redo all these different growth metrics and kind of come up with new ways of deciding if the church is healthy. Do you see other pastors kind of like reordering their whole perspective of what a healthy church is?
Some are in the same boat as many of the rest of us. We just wanted to get back to normal, whatever that was before. So we have tried to cast COVID in this regard as the great disruption. So it's not that we just had to get through it so we could be what we were before, but that it gives us that opportunity to rethink and take things in a different trajectory. And some pastors have really grabbed a hold of that because those metrics are no longer valid, that we all depended on. So how do we measure health in a congregation now takes on a whole new conversation.
Yeah, and before, I would pull out an Ed Stetzer growth chart or something, and I'd go, I'd show the board, because let's face it, we do want to please our boards, not just because they're our bosses, but we want them to be happy. And so you'd say, hey, look, we're growing 8%. Look what Ed Stetzer says. He says this is really good. So let's be happy. Well, most of us have lost 25% or 30% in the past 2 years. And meanwhile, your board members are kind of going like, well, where are all my friends? Because they're not reading the same stuff that I am. And so it is something about, there is an art form of bringing your board along and becoming a collaborative group. And that takes skill, and it takes time, and it takes patience. I've gone to do church consults where I've gone into boardrooms with pastors that have asked me to come, and the pastor has something on his heart that he's just burning to do, that he's prayed about, and he's, it might be church planting, it might be something like adding another service or whatever. And the board members are just totally unresponsive, and you can just see the pastor just being crushed right in front of my eyes. So I guess this is a two-part question. How does a pastor deal with a dysfunctional governance situation? Because there are those. I call them churches that like to eat pastors up, And conversely, how do the leaders of a church help a pastor realize some of those dreams without compromising the church?
Sure. Well, that's a really important question, two-part question. And I'm not sure that there's a cookie cutter approach to that, because every situation is unique. But if there's truly dysfunction in a board, I think going back to, I think it's Lencioni's pyramid that he uses, the foundational piece of that is trust.
Yeah.
And that's the first step. And if that's not there, then that's where you have to live for a while before you take off and try to do things. You've got to build that trust and have the ability to have those hard conversations. And the other piece is to not be afraid of conflict. And that goes both ways. Sometimes we avoid conflict at all costs, and that doesn't work. We'll never get to the truth if we do that. So we have to have trust and then be able to have those kinds of conversations where you work it out. For board members to help pastors realize some of the things that they envision for the church is to have that a spirit of hospitality. And the way I understand that, and the way I've understood it for a while now, is that we make room for others and their ideas in our lives. Okay. And so we have that sense of, okay, I'm going to listen well, and I'm going to give good feedback, but then I'm also going to be that advocate or champion for my pastor as well, because if this is something that the Lord has really put into their heart, then I don't want to run past that.
Mm-hmm. So you take in a sense, it's kind of I'm not sure, but I trust my pastor enough to at least help him. And then I think most pastors are open to feedback if something's not working. You don't want to keep doing it, but I think it's just that constant. I like that a lot, what you said. Roy Yanke is our guest, and he helps pastors restore. And all right, now we're in the business of easy questions here, and we don't have much time left, but and for all of the people in my church listening, this is not about our church, not about our board, but how does a pastor know when it's time to leave a church?
Well, I am a fan of long-term ministries, but there are times when it's important. And again, there's a spectrum for that. Sometimes it's a matter where you definitely see that your influence, your ability to lead is not being received, or it's compromised in some way. And not talking about, a moral or ethical issue, but there just isn't that trust. And you've been there long enough to see that you've taken it as far as you can take it. And so to move them out into a different role and doing that well, having that transition happen well is really important. The other piece of that is if burnout is occurring, if a pastor is not healthy themselves, then that may be a time to intentionally take a step back. A sabbatical is a good piece of that. That can certainly help, but maybe it means just rethinking the shape of the calling going forward. And so it means stepping out of that role for a while. Some pastors, there are seasons. And, church planters aren't always the ones that can take a church forward past that planting role. So they need to understand their own giftedness and their own strengths and weaknesses and be able to do a good handoff in that kind of situation.
I think that's really important. And that's where mentorship comes in again. Before I've taken a job in a church, I've gone to mentors and said, does this church match my gifts? And I'm if they were to look at me and say, not really, then I would walk away really fast, because I don't always understand myself as well as other people do, and not everybody's meant for every kind of church. We all have our different callings. God, I think, has given me the ability to help revitalize churches, but that may not mean being at a church for 20 years. It may. Why is long-term ministry intriguing to you, and what are the advantages of long-term ministry?
I think that the whole relational piece is huge for me, that you build those relationships, that you are pastoring over generations and being able to speak into the lives of people over the long haul. You see the births, you see the sicknesses, you see the deaths, you see all of those things. And I think that so statistically, most pastoral ministries that we understand last 5 to 7 years at any point. You're just beginning to build that trust. You're just beginning to see the fruit of investing in people's lives and being a pastor to them. And then all of a sudden a new pastor comes in. So it's just the idea that for continuity of what God wants to do in that situation, long-term ministries, in my mind, certainly seems like an important thing.
Yeah, that's very, very good. And do you see pastors staying in the pulpit longer, and I'm talking about age now, than maybe before, because we know that there's not enough pastors. Culture as a whole seems to be okay with that. Is there a time when a pastor can continue to go past 65, 66, 68 years old and still be an effective minister?
I think so. It just depends on the culture that they built around that, the culture of the church. I think that all of us need to be self-aware enough to know when our capacities are diminishing or when our energy is no longer there and somebody else needs to step into that. But I don't, I'm 68. So I'm still, I feel my 68 years, but at the same time, I know that I'm not finished yet. And I think that's important for every pastor to pay attention to is certainly the wealth of experience that a pastor has when they're 65, 70 years old can't be diminished. That's important for a church.
And just don't wear skinny jeans when you're preaching. And this is, an encouragement. I think that you and I would agree with this, that if you're willing to hire young staff members that can keep that energy going and you're developing them and there's an excitement around it, what young families are not looking for the young, cool pastor necessarily. They're looking for someone they can trust and someone that they know cares about them. And I think when those things are in place, age can kind of disappear if you have the energy. Now I look at you and I would have never thought that, and I would say you're doing great. But then there are other people I look at that are a little bit older, and they look like, oh no, it's time now, time to go golfing. But make sure you're witnessing while you're golfing, because we don't want to. All right, Roy, how do we get a hold of your organization? Because I love what you're doing, and it's important what you're doing, especially in this culture right now in this spot that we are. How can someone get in touch with you that either has a pastor that might be hurting? Maybe the pastor is saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. The wife is saying, oh no. How do we get a hold of you?
Sure. And please, if you're listening, do reach out to us if any of those things are going on. We are thinking partners, and our culture is one of building relationships. So we're not going to impose a program or a tool on you until we've had a long time to walk together. So they can get a hold of us on the internet. We have a website, pirministries.org, and there's a contact sheet in that website. They can get in touch with us that way, and we will respond right away. They can see us on Facebook or LinkedIn. We have a presence there. And certainly if someone really wants an immediate response, they can email me directly at roy@pirministries.org.
Well, God bless you, my friend. You're doing a really, really important work, and I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for your openness, and it's been great to have you. Thanks for dropping by.
Oh, Paul, it's been great. Thank you for the invitation.